A safe haven Christmas. The room was in pitch darkness as old George stirred. The last few days had been long and hard. The cold had played the devil with his arthritis, but the entire community was depending on him, now more than ever. He switched on the lantern by the side of his bed and put on his watch, the one his father had given him. His clothes were neatly folded on the chair next to his bedside cabinet, and he reluctantly climbed out of bed and put them on. It was going to be another long day. He would shower and breakfast a little later, but right now he needed a cup of tea more than anything. George walked into the kitchen and placed the kettle onto the stove before throwing in some kindling and half a log to get the fire going again. The solid fuel kitchen range had been plumbed into the hot water and central heating system, and although the embers were still glowing from the night before, the temperature around the house had dropped. George blew into his hands while he waited for the kettle to start boiling. After a few minutes, he was holding a steaming mug of black tea. He took a sip and let out a satisfied "ah" before walking through the house and out to the workshop. He stopped suddenly as he noticed the light was already on. George had a routine, and he knew for a fact he had turned all the lights off the previous evening. He slowly opened the side door and stepped inside. "Not long ago, this would have been called breaking and entering," he said to the figure examining something on one of the workbenches. "These guns have to be ready for tonight. If they're not, I can't even begin to tell you what will happen." George let out a frustrated sigh. "Always a pleasure to see you, Mike." "And how are the swords coming along?" "Yes, I'm fine, thank you for asking," George replied. Mike looked up from the bench. "I'm sorry, George. How are you keeping?" "I was a lot better a few minutes ago." "Do you need help? I can get you help, but this stuff has to be ready. We'll be completely screwed otherwise." George let out another long sigh and took a sip of tea. "As I said to you last week, 2 days ago, and yesterday, everything will be ready." George was known for being one of, if not the most placid person in Safe Haven, but suddenly he felt his temples begin to throb a little. "You sure? It's not a weakness to admit you need help, George, 'cause this stuff doesn't look anywhere near ready to me." George was about to say something, and then caught his words. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm sure. Thank you, Mike. I don't need any help. Everything is going just as I want it to. Well, up until walking in here at just after 6 this morning and finding someone in my workshop." Mike started taking his coat off. "Look, I'll give you a hand for a couple of hours. It'll speed things along a bit." "Stop!" George even surprised himself with the volume of his voice. "Mike, I appreciate everything you do for this community. You're a good man, would be lost without you. But right now, I need you to leave my workshop. Otherwise, I swear to God that you'll be finding sawdust and iron filings in every mouthful of every meal you eat from now until doomsday." George felt something hot on his hand and noticed it was shaking with anger. Hot tea had spilt out of the mug, over his fingers and onto the workshop floor. "Damn it," he said to himself. Mike stood there for a second with his mouth open, then placed his arms back into the sleeves of his jacket. "Okay, George, okay. Just let me know if you need anything," he said, looking at George's shaking hand. "I will. Thank you," George replied. "See you later." "See you later, George," said Mike as he walked out of the workshop. George stood there for a moment, looking down at the puddle of tea on the floor. "Dear God, give me strength," he said, before finally heading over to his workbench. "Mike, what an absolute fucking joy it is to see you at 6:30 in the fucking morning. What's it been? 5 hours since you were here last?" "Morning, Jules. Sleep well?" No, as a matter of fact," replied Jules, in her usually warm but currently frosty Belfast accent. "I like my periods of sleep to be anything from 6 to 10 hours, and I don't like being woken in the middle of the fucking night when it's so cold. I can literally feel me tits freezing when I stand there. What can you possibly want at this time?" "I've just been down to George's, and I'm not convinced everything is going to be in place in time. He was kind of upset when I left him. I was wondering if you could go and see him," Mike said. "Did George say he'd be ready?" "Yeah, but..." "Then he'll be ready. In all the time I've known him, he's never failed to deliver on a promise, and I can fully understand why you get the vibe he was upset. It's 6:30 in the fucking morning. I'm fucking upset. And I can guess just what he said to you as well. There's a word, Mike. It's tact. Go see Ruth, Richard and David. They'll get you a dictionary definition." "All I'm asking..." "I know what you're fucking asking. I'll go see him later, but right now, I'm gonna run a hot bath and see if I can get this flock of penguins that's just moved onto me right tit back off and onto some other iceberg. I'll speak to yous later," said Jules, starting to close the door. "It's a waddle," Mike said. "What?" "The collective term for penguins. It's a waddle." "Get off my fucking doorstep now before I say something I can't take back," Jules said, slamming the door in Mike's face. Mike stood there for a moment, a little bemused by the morning's events, before returning to the car. Mike and Hughes stood in the kitchen as they watched the sun rise into the blue mid-morning sky. "I've told you, they headed out at about 5 o'clock, Hughes said. Okay, I was only asking," Mike replied. In the army, Hughes had experienced all sorts, but nothing had prepared him for the level of frustration he was feeling right now. "Look, Mike, everyone knows how important it is we're ready. Everyone knows what's at stake if we're not. Everyone is doing their best. There isn't a soul in Safe Haven who doesn't know what they have to do, and they're all doing it. So I'm telling you as me mate, calm the fuck down and stop hassling everybody. Otherwise, I'm going to be fishing your body out of the fucking bay. You're doing people's heads in." "You've been speaking to Jules, haven't you?" "Jules and George and Sarah and Emma. The list goes on and on. Fuck me. Jules was so pissed off with you, she was pissed off with me. You know how much she loves George. When she went to visit him today, he got so worked up when you were mentioned, he needed his inhaler. He hasn't used that in months." "Okay," Mike said. "Point taken. I just need to make sure everything's in place." "I know, mate. But you going around micromanaging people isn't going to do anything but piss them off. We'll be ready. We were ready for Fry. We'll be ready for this." "You're right. I know you're right. I just worry, that's all." "I know you do, mate. Now, I've got a lot to do, so, in the nicest possible way, please fuck off," Hughes said, breaking out into a wide grin. Mike smiled, the pair of them hugged, and Mike left Hughes's cottage and headed to his car. When Mike walked through his front door, he was hit by a wave of heat and mouth-watering aromas from the kitchen. His younger siblings, Sammy and Jake, rushed up to meet him, and he knelt down to give them both an older brotherly hug. "What's going on?" Sammy asked. "What do you mean?" Mike replied. "There's something going on. I can sense it." "You can sense it, can you?" Mike said, smiling. "Well, there is something going on. It's grown-up stuff. You'll understand one day." "Why aren't we allowed in the kitchen? And why was Sarah crying earlier?" "Sarah was crying?" Mike asked, immediately climbing back to his feet. The smile left his face. "Do me a favour, Sammy. Take Jake and go and play a game or something." Sammy let out a frustrated huff to show her disapproval at being dismissed, but she did as she was asked. Mike walked through the kitchen door and saw Sarah sat at the table sobbing, while Emma was gently rubbing her back. "What's wrong?" Mike asked, at which point Sarah began to cry more audibly. Emma stood up straight. Her eyes pierced holes through Mike's as she went across to him, grabbed him tightly by the arm, and walked him out of the kitchen. When they were safely out of earshot, she turned to face him. What the fuck did you say to Sarah? She's been inconsolable for the last half hour. What? I didn't say anything. Why do you always blame me? Well, it coincided with you going into the kitchen just before leaving the house. I swear I didn't say. Then an expression of panic appeared on Mike's face. What? She took it wrong. She took what wrong? I didn't mean her. What are you talking about? She understands how important this is. She has been working non-stop to make sure there's enough food to last us. We all know what's in the balance. She's been pulling in harder than anyone. What did you say? Mike looked down at his feet. Don't fucking look down there. Look me in the face. What did you say? I asked her if she was okay. And? I really appreciated what she was doing to support the effort. And? I asked if she needed some help because she seemed to be struggling to keep up, and there didn't seem to be a lot of food for what we needed. Was she sure she knew how many she was feeding? You are such a dick, said Emma. It just came out wrong. I didn't think. You are such a complete dick. Look, I'll go apologise. Too fucking right you'll apologise. Get in there now, Emma said, pointing towards the kitchen door. Mike stepped into the kitchen and walked up to the table, pulling up a chair next to Sarah, who was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Mike moved in closer and put his arms around Sarah's shoulders. I'm really sorry. I was very insensitive, and I didn't think about what I was saying. Sarah looked towards him. Her eyes were red, and tears still streamed down her cheeks. Mike looked away from her, feeling a shudder of guilt run through him. He glanced around the kitchen to see boxes and Tupperware containers filled with all sorts of food that had been prepared that morning. I'm so sorry, Sarah. You've done amazing. This is incredible. Thank you so much. It's essential that there is enough food for everybody. It's going to be a long, long night. You've no idea what an incredible difference you've made. Sarah sniffed and dabbed at her tears again. This time no new ones formed, and she tried to smile. Honestly, you've done brilliant, and I'm sorry I was such an idiot, he said, leaning in and kissing her on the cheek. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice still a little shaky. Mike stood up and took a deep breath. He wanted to say something else to reassure her, but suddenly he realised that not saying anything to anybody ever again might be a safer policy. He heard the front door open and stepped back out into the hallway. It was Lucy, and Mike's face lit up as he ran across to kiss her. Lucy looked at Emma's face. Who've you pissed off now? She asked, pulling back and looking into Mike's eyes. You want a list? Emma asked. Lucy smiled. Come on, she said to Mike. Come on where? You're coming with me. Where? Just get in the car, Lucy replied, winking at Emma. Where are we going? Mike asked again as they sped along the road to the village. Mike, you know I love you, don't you? Yeah, and I love you. I know, sweetie. I know you do, and it's the best feeling in the world. But I really need you to know that I love you, because what I'm about to say doesn't alter just how much I love you. Okay, Mike said, a little nervously. I don't think there is anyone you haven't upset or pissed off today. You're such a control freak. And when we were in a fight for our lives like we were against Fry, then it was just what was needed. But it's Christmas, Mike. We're organising a Christmas get-together for the community. And we're organising presents for the kids and the old folks. And there's going to be food and music, and people are going to have a fantastic time. A lot of work is going into it, and everybody knows what they need to do. She squeezed his hand. This just has to be right. Everybody's been through so much, Luce. This will make such a massive difference. I know, and it will, replied Lucy. We're going to have the best time, all of us, everybody. The kids, the grown-ups, it's going to be amazing. I know this was all your idea, and I know how your mind works. You feel responsible, and if something goes wrong, you'll take it personally. But you have to start understanding it's not just you. We're a community. Safe Haven is a community. This is us. If something goes wrong, we'll put it right. As a community. The car pulled up outside the pub run by Jenny, the hotelier who they'd travelled up with from Yorkshire. "What are we doing here?" Mike asked. "Dora and a couple of the other girls are looking after things over at the hospital. And you and me are going to have the afternoon off," said Lucy, smiling. "What? We can't. There's way too much to do." Lucy clamped her left hand around Mike's jaw and pulled his face around to make sure she had his attention. "Did you hear a word I just said?" "Yeah, but..." "No. No buts. Get out of the car, or you and me are going to have a serious disagreement. I'm going to spend the afternoon with my guy and my friends while other people take care of all the arrangements that need making for the party tonight. This is our first Christmas together. We've been to hell and back, and I'll be damned if we're not going to have just the teeniest bit of fun now." Began Mike, as Lucy raised an eyebrow. "I think that sounds like a great idea." She leaned across and kissed him roughly on the mouth. "Good. Come on, then." The pair of them got out of the car and walked into the pub. Jenny came up and kissed them both. She was already more than a little merry, and her eyes were glazed. The pub was a hive of activity. Hughes, Jules, George, Raj and Talika were sat in a corner, busily preparing coloured paper decorations, while Humphrey and his new pal Meg laid down in front of the blazing fire with full bellies and food-filled doggy dreams. "Come on, darlings, join in the fun," Jenny said, leading them across to the corner and sitting them down before disappearing behind the bar. Jules looked towards Mike and raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry," Mike said, first looking at Jules, then Hughes, and finally George. "You guys have never let me down, ever, and I shouldn't have doubted any of you for a second. I'm really sorry if I upset you." Suddenly, all of their faces warmed. "Ah, come here, you wee shite," Jules said, leaning over the table and giving Mike a hug. "We're family, and it's Christmas. We're bound to get on each other's tits. That's what families do at Christmas." "Here, here," Jenny said, placing 2 glasses of something with a frothy head in front of Mike and Lucy. "Drink up. We make our own beer now, you know," she said, smiling. They all lifted their glasses. "Cheers!" At 7 o'clock, the group in the pub headed across to the village hall. The place was packed. Trestle tables had been set up against the far wall, and mountains of food covered them. Sarah stood at one end, proudly, as people enthused about some of the many delights she'd been responsible for making. Music was playing loudly, and coloured disco lights were flashing away. As well as making toy swords, guns, and all sorts of fun things for the children, George had set up generators to make sure they could have a proper party, one that would be talked about all year long. Friends hugged, kissed, and danced as all the trials and horror of the past months were forgotten. This evening was about happiness and community and hope and the future. "It's time," Mike said to Hughes, and Hughes gave a nod to Lucy and Emma. Lucy took Mike by the hand and led him into a small office at the back of the hall. Emma, Sarah and Jules walked in behind him and closed the door. The 4 women stood with their arms folded, blocking the exit. "Where's Hughes?" Mike asked. "There has been a change of plans, sweetie," Lucy replied. Mike's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "Well, darling, it's like this," Jules began. "Because you've been such an absolute fucking ray of sunshine to be around over the last few days, we decided you're going to be the one playing Santa tonight, and not Hughes." "But I can't," Mike said, looking genuinely panicked. "Oh, yes, you can," Emma replied. "Seriously, I can't. I can't be Santa." "Babe, this is a done deal," Lucy replied. "Now, we can do this the easy way, or the hard way." Mike gulped. "Listen to me. I haven't rehearsed like Hughes. I don't know the words to the song. I don't know how to be Santa. It's a karaoke machine. The words are up there for yous. You do one song, then you hand the presents out. It's the cost of doing business," Jules said, smiling. I won't do it, Mike replied. Get Hughes in here. Looks like it's going to be the hard way, girls, Lucy said. Take his left arm. I'll take his right. Sarah, get his belt. Jules, get his trousers off. The women began to close in, and Mike's eyes widened. Stop! Mike screamed, putting his hands up. Okay, I'll do it. The Santa outfit is in the bag. We're going to turn round, but when we turn back around again, you better be ready, Lucy said as the 4 women began to giggle. I don't feel well, Mike moaned. The women continued to laugh. Mike reluctantly put the red costume on, padding and all. Okay, I'm ready. Lucy, Emma, Sarah and Jules all turned back around and burst out laughing. You look adorable. Lucy walked up to him and squeezed his cheeks. You forgot the beard, she said, reaching into the bag. Shaw, Beth and Barney went a long way for this costume and those lights out there, so we're going to make the most of it all. She put the beard on him and started giggling again. Just then, an amplified voice could be heard drowning out all the other excited voices in the hall. It was Hughes. Now, boys and girls, we have a very special treat for you. Can we have a big round of applause, please, for Father Christmas? The whole hall erupted into cheers and whoops as the office door opened. Mike began to head out. He turned to the 4 women as he passed them. I hate you all, he said, to which they all just burst out laughing. Mike stepped up onto the stage and looked at the full sacks of presents that all had gift tags attached. He looked at the karaoke machine, and he looked out at the crowd. He looked at Beth and Barnes and Shaw and Ruth and Richard and David and Jenny, as well as 100 other smiling faces, before focusing on just 2. He saw Sammy and Jake right at the front. He saw their looks of utter glee, and suddenly he felt it too. Pure happiness. As the karaoke machine began to play Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and Hughes handed him the microphone, Mike remembered why this had all been so important. He stepped towards the front of the stage, and his voice filled the hall as he shouted, Merry Christmas, everybody!